get here, then they can just join in, and they can join in on the chat and in our video link as well. It's lovely to see you all here this afternoon. I'm Libby. I'm a teacher here in the ACT, where I've been practicing for the last 10 years. Throughout my career, I've taught across a range of year groups as a classroom teacher. I've also worked as an ELAD specialist and as a literacy consultant working in schools with teachers. My current position is actually as a teacher librarian in my school. I'm really passionate about quality literacy teaching, and I love running professional development on literacy teaching, and I've done a bit of that in schools around the ACT and for ALIA nationally, and I've helped with some ALIA publications in my time. I'm a big nerd, and I'm currently studying my 3rd Masters of Education, and this one's a research one. So I'd love to hear a bit about all of you in a moment as well, and I'll open up the floor for you to introduce yourselves and where you're from, and what year groups you're teaching, because I think what's really important is that I can cater this to you and where you are and the year levels that you're working with. So I give you that bit of a spiel just so that you know that I have a bit of an knowledge from K to 6, but certainly this workshop has been adapted for secondary as well. So this professional development is focused around some of the key teaching strategies as presented in the book Teaching Strategies for Literacy. You might have already received your copy of this. If you haven't, not a worry at all, it either would be on the way to you, but I also explain some of those strategies in the slides as well. So if you don't have it handy, not to worry. But if you do, that's also a benefit. My aim in this workshop is really to assist beginning teachers in understanding these strategies, perhaps for the first time, and for those that are more experienced, to have that open discussion about the strategies they're using in their class, evaluate ones that you might not be using, ones that you want to change, and refine these in any way you want to. So this professional development isn't about programs, it's not about plans, it's really the bedrock stage before planning, which answers the question of, like, what should I see in a literacy classroom? And really it is that we have a broad range of strategies and we use them to meet the needs of our students and their goals. Personally, this book actually means a lot to me. I was gifted it in my first year of teaching. I read it cover to cover in the first few weeks that I had it, and I marked so many strategies. Ones that I'd never heard of before in my undergraduate degree, and others that I'd heard of but I never quite understood. I found that they were explained really well in this book. And a lot of these strategies is still fun in my teaching today. So before we get started, I'd love to know about you. Where are you in Australia at the moment? And perhaps what year group you're teaching. And you can even tell us how long you've been teaching for if you'd like to. And also how you're doing. I hope everyone's doing okay, because I know it's been a stressful, hard time around the nation, around the world. So where are you? What year group are you teaching? Tell me about yourself. You can use the mic as well, just unmute it if you want to talk, or you can use the chat.
I'm from I live in Dulwich and I teach kindy, and it's my first year teaching.
Sorry, where is Dulwich?
It's near Newtown, like Marrickville, in Sydney.
In Sydney, okay.
Oh, sorry.
You have to like give me states.
Sorry.
I'm obviously a literacy teacher. Geography is not my strength. I gave that away too soon. Thanks, Esther. So you're on Kinder. Cool.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to be brave and use the microphone, or you can just type if you're feeling nervous.
All right, I'm Tyson.
Hi, Tyson.
Hello. I'm in my 4th year of teaching. I'm working in Jamestown in South Australia, so it's about 2.5 hours from Adelaide.
Wow. Yep.
I've got year 8s this year, but I'm also the middle school coordinator, so I'm in charge of 7s to 9s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll make sure that we can go from kinder to year 8. Do we have anyone in the middle ground as well? I can see our big group there from Coburg West. Oh, sorry. Yep. Matt.
Hello. I'm Matt. I'm in Bridport, Tasmania, and teaching Year 2, first year teacher this year, been back and retrained. So.
Awesome. Welcome, Matt. And Year 2, oh, my favourite year. I taught that for many years. So love Year 2. Have a soft spot for them. That's great.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jess, and I'm actually a pre-service teacher. So this is my last 6 months of my 4-year bachelor. And
Awesome.
my prac this year is with Year 5.
Cool. Yeah, I had quite a few pre-service teachers in the last group as well. Are you from Queensland, Jess?
No, I'm from Melbourne, but my uni is in WA.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of Queensland pre-service teachers in the last one. But that's it. Any other pre-service teachers with us this afternoon?
I am.
Hi there. What's your name?
I'm Elizabeth.
Hi, Elizabeth. I'm going to rename you.
Sorry, I was a little bit late to the party. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why that's my school login, so it just must have come up with my code. Anyone wants to know my code at school?
And do you have a prac coming up in a certain year level? Are you primary or secondary, Elizabeth?
Yeah, so I'm early childhood specialty, but I've got a prac coming up in Year 2 very soon. But I'm fortunate to work in a school already, just through other means.
Mm-hmm.
So I get to see a lot of the primary school. So I'm quite interested across all the year groups in primary.
Cool. Great. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, so we're from Coburg West in Victoria, Melbourne, and there's about 10 of us in this room, and we're ranging from prep right through to grade 6 with our teaching teams here.
Awesome. Lovely to see you all here today, Coburg West. Nice big group. Was there anyone else? Feel free to type in the chat if you're feeling.
Hi, I'm Adriana.
Hi, Adriana.
I'm in Mackay in Central Queensland. I'm a secondary school teacher, but the school I'm in at the moment is a middle school, so it's 7 to 10.
Okay.
And I have 8 and 9s.
You have 8 and 9s. Okay, so it's another Year 8 teacher there as well. I'm going to assume that you're working in English?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Hi, Joe from Kiama. And you can hear clear now. What are you teaching, Joe? If I did actually have a group of secondary teachers that were PE teachers come to one of the workshops. I was like, okay, we'll try to make this work for you as well, but it's a bit more of a stretch. Oh, okay, your pre-service as well, Dawn. Year 4-5. Great, all good. I totally understand the audio visual issues. Let me tell you about my afternoon. I get ready to come. I packed my bag, and then I realized I had my charger cable, I had my speaker cable, but I had no laptop. I'd left my laptop at school. So I had to race across town to get my laptop, and then I raced back here to these training rooms where I'm running it from because I've got 2 small people at home that would come in and scream and shout. And then my computer started to restart. So we're here though, and we've made it. So the computers haven't beaten us yet. So if you do get any issues this afternoon, not only do I sympathise with you completely, but also I'm recording this session. So if it drops out at any point, you can get the recording as well from Robin after everything's done, or you can send me an email as well. If you still wanted to introduce yourself, maybe just do that in the chat now, and we'll get started with what we're going to look at this afternoon. So during this session, I will be going over some of the following strategies. These are just a few of the strategies that are presented in the book. So to begin with, we'll explore some strategies that I think are quite fundamental to teaching. These are strategies that you'd be using every day as a teacher of literacy. Following this, we'll focus on a few handy strategies that can be used across disciplines. And then we'll look at some organisational strategies to really have in your toolbox. And finally, there'll be time for questions at the end of the session. So keeping in the format of the book, for each strategy, I'll explain the strategy. I'll give some examples of how I've used it in my teaching. Feel free to share as well if you've used that strategy in your teaching, how you've used it, or any resources that you've used to go with it. I think being collaborative learners together really works well for online learning. And then following this, I might have an activity or two that'll assist you to just feel confident using that strategy in your class. As I explain each strategy, I'd encourage you to go to the page in your copy of the book, and I do have the page numbers on those slides. Highlight any parts that you want to as we talk about it, and write your notes on the pages, just so that you have that, that note for when you go to use these strategies in your class. All right, let's get started with some of the strategies that I would say are fundamentals to literacy classrooms. Now, these are practices that you'd be using every day in your class. And yes, they would look different depending on if you're in primary or in secondary or in middle school, but they are practices that we would be seeing in every class. So the first strategy we're going to look at is reading aloud. It's so important to be able to read to our students. And this one's explained on page 42. You want to flip there. So when reading aloud, we need to remember a few things. Oh, I'll also let you know that the rooms that I'm in have these sensor lights that turn off every few minutes. So if you see me doing wild hand gestures, that's just to keep the lights on. They expect presenters to be walking around and interacting with the audiences here and not sitting stationary for a long period of time. So the first thing to remember is to choose a great text when you read aloud. Choose something that you enjoy reading, something that you love reading, because when we read books and texts and literature that we love, that comes across to the students, and then they can pick up on that love of learning, that love of reading. I've also written here, choose a great text, not book, for a reason, because it doesn't have to be a book. There's so many different forms of text now that we are able to engage with our students, and particularly those that perhaps have become disengaged in the reading process. Sometimes changing the text type or moving to a multimodal text can be a really engaging factor. One thing that I've started looking into, and write it down if you haven't started looking at them, are augmented reality books. Now, there's an amazing New Zealand author, and he writes these beautiful augmented reality novels, and I've forgotten the name of the series, but I can look it up if you're interested. And they're on a dragon, and as you're reading the book, there's parts in the books that you can actually scan with any phone or iPad device, and you get images that come out, you get maps that come out or come onto your phone or your device, so you can engage further in the book. But there's also quite a number for younger readers as well. My son and I read together How to Train Your Dragon augmented reality book, which was really exciting because when you scan the pages, you could then fly the dragon around the room and you could see it moving around and sitting on people's heads. And there's Toy Story ones. There's ones, someone said there was an Anne Frank augmented reality text, which I think would be really interesting, seeing where she was and what the rooms was like that she was hidden in. So we'll do have a look at these as a different kind of read aloud text. The other type of text that I always think of as well as we engage students are app books that are coming in as well to being, and I know these have been around for a while, but they're the ones that you can press on parts and they open up. One company that I really like, and if you have any app books or find any by this company, then I'd highly suggest them, a Wheelbarrow. Now, they had an app book for the very cranky bear where you could touch his head and he'd go, ow, and then, different things happened as you could interact with the text, so the kids could really get a feel for it. But if you're really stuck in finding a great text, one that you love, I'm going to show you a few links as well of where to look for those books. Or you could just ask your teacher librarian or your phone a teacher librarian for the day. I can help you out as well. The second step here is to rehearse. The best books to read to students are ones that you've already internalized or ones you already know. the longer text, reading ahead is also so necessary. I have my favourite books, just as you will, and I know them so well that I can recite them from memory. Rehearsing can allow you to really let your inner actor out. Because as I show you an example of reading aloud in a moment, you're going to see that reading aloud isn't just reading, it's almost performance. And we make the book as engaging and, really as much of a performance as possible to allow students to really internalise and comprehend these stories. When I was reading The Magic Hat to a group of kinder students who were mostly ELAD, when I rehearsed, I noticed there was this rhythm to it, and I added movement. The magic hat, it moves like this, it moves like that, it spun through the air, and these movements then help these ELAD students to really remember this text, and they were then doing the movements along with me and reading with me within a week, which is huge for a group of kinder ELAD kids that were mostly non-readers. But this also applies to older readers. I read Rabbit Proof Fence with a group of 5/6s, and I'm reading Australia. This is listed as a Year 9 level book. And the content in it, like there is a lot of serious content in it. So I really needed to read ahead to know what chapters I would need to slow down at, which ones we could kind of go through quicker, and how I would prepare my students for what was to come in the text. And that kind of leads into step 3, which is how we would introduce a book to students. Now, that always is going to be dependent on the book and on your students. So for some texts and for some classes, it might just be a really brief and quick explanation. But this is really when we develop, or when we, LAT, yes, English as an additional language or dialect. Thank you. But this is when we really develop prior knowledge for our students, or we open up their prior knowledge. Debbie Miller, who's a researcher in reading, talks about the connections or the schema that we need to open up in, the connections that we kind of need to make for students before they can understand or comprehend a book. She talks about these schema almost as folders that you need to open up your folder on. If I was to read Mutt Dog, you'd need to open up your folder on dogs and everything you understand and know about dogs and where they live and how they eat and how they move, for you to be actually able to comprehend the message of this book. So for some students, if they don't have those folders or that prior knowledge, we actually need to create it for them during this step. So for example, again, working with a mostly ELAD or ESL unit class, I was reading Possum Magic, and for this group, for them to comprehend the book, my introduction of the book took 2 weeks, because we made pavlova, we ate Vegemite sandwiches, we looked at a map of Australia, we researched all the Australian animals and looked at pictures of them, and we did some magic tricks so we could understand what magic was. But then for another class, that introduction might just be a minute where you say, oh, remember all the Australian animals and who's had pavlova recently? But for this class, they'd never tasted pavlova. They had no concept of what tuna mornay was. So all these words needed context that I needed to fill in my introduction to the book. The 4th step is to just read. And I love the part in this book where it states to just avoid interruptions, because it's so important sometimes to just read and just let the students listen to the book in the way the author intended it to be heard. So if you do need to stop, and I say if you're using a longer text, do this at really clearly defined boundaries, I'd say, such as chapters, have some way of tracking the story as well. So when I was reading Tom Appleby, Convict Boy, a Jackie French book, we actually made a cutout of Tom Appleby and we had him in the classroom, and when new characters were introduced, because Jackie French loves introducing new characters, we put their names onto post-notes and we stuck that onto Tom, and we kept that chapter details on another post-note and stuck them onto Tom. So we had this kind of ongoing plot line, I guess, in the form of one of the characters in our room to refer to as we were reading. And then the 5th step is to let students respond. Now, this can be as simple as questions or comments after the text is read, or you might want a more focused response, such as on a particular reading strategy. So say you're all focusing on connecting, and then you want your students to be able to connect to the text. But there's also some other suggestions of responses at the bottom of this strategy as well. So now we're going to do, oh, actually, before we get into that, I'm going to show you some links first. If you're having trouble finding quality books that you'd like to read aloud, this is where I suggest go. And actually, a lot of the strategies talk about having quality text. So I think it's really important to touch on this to begin with, so that you have some resources to go to. After I show you those links, I'm going to get you to listen to Stephen Lane read a text that he's written. He's an author, but he's also an educator. He's written a lot on the benefits of reading aloud, and he highly encourages educators to read aloud more and more. If you've seen him as a presenter, sorry, I'm just looking at the question as well that Dawn's asked, which I'll get back to in a moment. If you've seen him as a presenter, he's just such an engaging presenter, but he also talks a lot about that read aloud. So I'm going to get you to listen to him read aloud, and then we're going to kind of reflect on what makes his read aloud so special. Why is that different from just sitting down and reading a book? And then I've got a little challenge for you. Now, Dawn's asked, did I refer to the book during those activities? Also, the association came later. So this was, I think, in reference to me talking about those activities I did for Possum Magic, where we were doing all these things. You can do it either way. With this group of students, I had actually story mapped the book with them already. So I hadn't read it to them, but we'd gone through what happens in the story. We'd drawn images of the things. So then we had kind of, a reference point of, okay, remember that place in Adelaide or wherever they at the pavlova. that pavlova, this is what we're going to try today. Today we're going to make a pavlova. So just so they have that reference. But you wouldn't necessarily need to do that either. Make it work for your class and your kids. Okay, let's have a look-see. So I was going to suggest these two places to look for if you're really struggling to find a book that you love to read to your class. Then I'd suggest looking at the Children's Book Council of Australia. So they have their shortlist up for Book of the Year this year. They're notables for 2020. But even better than that, if you go to Book Week, previous book, oh, sorry, no, that's not it. Book of the Year, previous winners in Book of the Year, then you've got a huge list of books from the time that Book Week started. So if you don't go, I don't really know if there's any good quality books in our library, click on one of these, click on one of the winners lists. You can see them, you can look up some of the authors, and then bam, there's some quality text for you to use in your classroom. So Children's Book Council of Australia, and also the fact that they have them here giving you an age range or an age reference. So I've got younger readers, early childhood, and older readers. Reading Australia is the other place that I would highly suggest you go and have a look at. CBCA are amazing, aren't they? Reading Australia have books, again, quality texts listed by primary, secondary, and tertiary year levels. And here, they have them more specifically for year groups. Sometimes it's a double year group, like 3-4, but generally they're for one year group. What you're going to get when you look at Reading Australia, quality text in year groups, so you have an understanding. But even better than that, each of these come with a full teacher's resource that goes through the different stages of reading a text. So you might use this for your read aloud, but you might also use this as a book study and be something that you, and it talks about before reading activities and things like that as well. Love Reading Australia. And these are all free. You can save them, you can download them, you can use parts of them. An amazing resource if you haven't found Reading Australia. Okay, now for our next thing, I'm going to get you to stop Stephen Lee. I'm just going to change the way that you can see this so that you can hear the sound as well. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to listen to Stephen Lane read one of his books. And I want you to, as you're listening to him read, reflect on what makes his read aloud so awesome, because he is like the king of read alouds, if you ask me.
Books that is a hit with young readers because it speaks to an experience so many of them can relate to firsthand. You see, my daughter, Victoria, was not nearly so thrilled as the rest of the family at the arrival of baby Jackson in our home. To coin a phrase, she was coming undone. My oldest boy had graciously welcomed Victoria into the home, but she was not nearly so pleased about Jackson's arrival. And everybody rushing around, "Oh, Victoria, look at your baby brother. Isn't he cute?" And she would growl like a wild animal. Her first comment to us was, "Send the baby back. I'm the baby in the Lane family." And she continued to this day to be a bit of a diva, I have to say. The first time they were alone together, little Jackson was sitting in the pouch of this baby saucer. He couldn't stand, of course, at that time, and playing with his toys. My wife called me into the dining room to help her put a leaf in the table, and this left Victoria alone in the family room with baby Jack. I'm not quite sure how a 4-year-old managed this, but suddenly we hear the loudest crash I think I've ever heard, wild screams from the baby, and we come racing into the room to find that she has not tilted the baby saucer, teachers. She has thrown the entire thing completely over. It's upside down. His feet are in the air. His head is underneath it. The arms are flailing out from the sides. He's screaming. And my wife is, of course, falling to her knees and extracting him from this device. And Victoria is leaning against the fireplace, you know, arms folded. The hip is jutted out like the Queen of Sheba. And I get down on my knees, so I'm on her level, primary people, and I said, "Victoria Grace, what did you do to the baby?" And she said, "Nothing! He just fell!" I hollered over my shoulder for my wife to handle this, please, because I had to go and write it down. And what came out of it was "Love the Baby," illustrated by my good friend, Ard Hoyt. Mommy's first flowers bloomed the day baby came home. I was happy, but not for long. Babies aren't much fun. They can't play marbles or soccer or animal safari. What babies mostly do is cry. One night, I found Mommy rocking baby in our chair. I saw her tummy tickle baby the way she tummy tickles me. "Help me love the baby," Mommy said. So I tickled baby, but not on the tummy. I only pretended to help Mommy love the baby. In the summertime, when Nana came to visit, baby was big enough for a special Nana bath. Nana sang baby our scrub-a-dub song. "Help me love the baby," Nana sang. So I sang for baby, but not the scrub-a-dub song. I only pretended to help Nana love the baby. Everywhere we went, everybody told me, "Love the baby!" My neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, and my barber, Mr. Nelson, and even my Aunt Esther told me, "Love that baby." On the day of the big snow, I ran in to show Daddy my best snowman ever. Daddy and baby were building towers with our blocks. "Help me love the baby," Daddy called. So I built a tower for baby, and then I knocked it down. I wasn't helping anybody love that baby. But when baby cried and cried that night, no one came to help. So I tippy-toed in. Baby sat up and smiled. I tummy tickled baby. Baby giggled, tee-hee-hee. I sang the scrub-a-dub song. Baby sang along, ga-ga. I built a giant tower of blocks for baby to knock down. Boom, I shouted. Baby shouted, goo. When I read my favorite book out loud, baby fell asleep. I'm all done pretending. I love my baby. The end.
Feel free to start sharing what did you notice about Stephen Lane's read aloud. What made that read aloud so special? Or I guess differ from just when you open up a book and read aloud. Yeah, he really acted it out, didn't he? It was really performance.
That's just the tone and stuff we used as well.
That's exactly it, and varying it, not having the one monotone. He also does, when I've seen him present, he also reads another book that is very hard-hitting and it's powerful. It can be really powerful the way that you can read a story aloud, pausing for the effect. Did you notice as well that his tone and his voice level changed depending on what he was reading? So, and that gives you clues into the words. So he said something like, and then, I built a tower for baby and then I knocked it down. And you could even understand by the way that he said knocked it down, not only did his voice go down so that we understand what's happened to the bricks, but you can see the intent there. And so instantly the students get that inferential knowledge. They know what the author was trying to tell them in that text, even if they don't fully comprehend it themselves. So our read alouds can not only give that real literal, knowledge to students, those literal meanings, but it can also really help with the inferential, depending on the way that we read. You can tell how that baby or that boy bunny was feeling with that baby. You can see that anger, and then I think that it's sometimes when we read books we feel a bit shy, we feel like we shouldn't perform them or act them out, but I think that's just encouragement that the more that we do this, the more our students are going to be able to comprehend these texts that we read to them. So now, my little challenge to you is to try to read, these are the first 3 pages of that book that we had Stephen Lane read, Love the Baby, is to try to read this text with as much flair as Stephen Lane. Have you got it in yourself this afternoon? Are we feeling all flared out? I'll give it a moment, because there might be a brave soul out there this afternoon that thinks they can do it.
Hi, Libby. Well,
hi, Robin. Are you going to read aloud?
No, I've just had 4.5 hours on Zoom and I'm exhausted. And in the midst of all that, I forgot you. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
But it's lovely to see you've got a lovely big group today.
Yeah, and they have been really chatty. They've gone quiet
hello,
now you're here.
It's Robin Henderson, feeling guilty because I'm half an hour late to pop in.
Okay, Robin, you made it, which is lovely.
I did, but I'm not going to stay.
No, don't do that.
I need to go and have coffee or something.
So Robin's the one that's been emailing you with the information for today. Robin's the organizer of all these online trainings. So, yeah. Well,
but I'm going to stick around and hear whatever performance somebody's going to do next.
Is anyone feeling brave?
Yeah, I'll have a go at it.
Oh, yeah, good on you, Matt.
Okay. So, oh, hang on. Just make sure I can still see the screen.
All right.
Mummy's first flowers bloomed the day baby came home. I was happy, but not for long. Babies aren't much fun. They can't play marbles or soccer or... Oh, my screen's gone, sorry.
That was great. Oh, yeah.
But what babies mostly do is cry.
Awesome. That was awesome. And I think as well, just being able to allow the children into how that boy's feeling, because there's so much underlying meaning there in those words. Brilliant. Good on you, Matt. You get a round of applause for being our brave read aloud. I can see Kovac all applauding you. How lovely. Okay, moving along. We're going to move along now to guided reading. This is explained on page... Oh, and look, people on the chat are congratulating you as well, Matt. We're going to move along to guided reading.
I'll say goodbye and let you keep
Bye,
going.
Robin.
Bye.
Thank you. If you have any problems with today as well, Robin's the person to contact. She'll be able to put you in contact with the recording as well and send you all the links and stuff for that. So page 24 for guided reading. These pages, I think, define guided reading really well, but I do want to preface this by talking about the fact that guided reading looks very different for junior and senior primary, and let alone in middle school. And the way that you can structure reading in your day is very different depending on the context that you're in. I'm very good friends with some secondary teachers who have realised that actually there's not a lot of time to be listening to their students read in secondary or in middle school. But really all we can do is have realistic expectations here. So the most common question I get asked is, what should the other students be doing during guided reading? And the answer is very simple. They should be reading. So they don't need to be colouring or drawing or filling in black and masters. They should just be reading. And then this, therefore, means that guided reading down in kinder might only go for 5 minutes, might only go for 10 minutes. You might have 2 sessions of 5 minutes, if that's the length of time that your students can focus on reading or picture reading or flicking through books, because you need to make sure that this works so that your students can work on their independent reading and them working on their reading strategies during this guided reading time. Whereas in upper primary, then we can look at students starting guided reading sessions for 25 minutes and maybe even increasing this to 40 minutes. I know that when I was in 5-6, 40 minutes was quite easily done, but then back down in kinder, we had to stick to our 10 minutes or we were in big trouble. So teaching strategies for literacy talks about the things that we do before, during and after reading. Before you start reading with your students, you need to somehow group your students based on some kind of assessment. Now, this might be an assessment that you have in school, like PM benchmarks or Fontes and Pinnell. You might just do some running records or miscue analysis of students reading. Yes, the session will be recorded. Elizabeth's just asked that question in our chat. Okay, yeah, no, it is being recorded, so you're all good. So it makes it, or guided, you might assess just through reading conferences, which I'm going to talk about next. And this is a way to kind of quickly assess students during guided reading as well. Now, you might use those running records and miscue analysis to make your students into groups based on reading levels, or you might actually look at strategies, and you might set up your groups based on strategies. So you might have a group who are all working on their fluency or their accuracy when reading, or connecting with a text, or vocabulary development. The second step is to select a text. So I want to note here as well that the text that the group are reading, that you're reading with, doesn't all have to be the same text. They don't all need to be reading the same text. You can give students choice over this, and they can have choice over the text that they're reading for guided reading. Or you might want more of a book study approach, or a literature study approach, where students are all reading the same text. And now this will look different depending on your year level, depending on what you're trying to achieve here. When I've worked in year 5, I've had student choice books, and I've also had, okay, you can choose between these 5 different books that I have a series of books for. You could do it around author. So instead of a book study, you might have an author study, and you might say, you know, I want you to choose a Paul Jennings book. I want you to choose a book by Mem Fox in junior years. I find that particularly with upper grades, and those that are working middle school would know this, when we start to see students really switch off to reading and become unmotivated to reading, sometimes giving them choice over what they're reading can really help motivate them again. Now, this would mean that sometimes, you know, if you do have texts that are already prerequisite texts, think about guided reading as it can just be looking at news articles. It can be looking at information articles. It can be looking at photo stories, which are a new kind of text that are coming out. And then with Kinder, I've used, again, choice books and all one books with that ELAD group, because there was a lot of language that we had to develop before they had a path into the book. What I would do is I'd actually give them choice over, well, not really a lot of choice, but say 1 week we'd look at The Magic Hat, because that was my read aloud. So that was the book that I'd taught them all about, and then they'd each have a copy of The Magic Hat, or maybe, you know, a bit of a photocopied copy of The Magic Hat. So they each had a copy of that book so they could be reading. I highly encourage that students are reading quality texts and not those leveled reader books. So it does look different if you're working with a group that has different books, and I'm going to talk about that as I go through as well, Dawn. So prior to reading the text with the group, you do need to develop their prior knowledge of it. Now, as I mentioned before, that might just be opening up what do you know about your book? What do you know about the themes that are in there? It might just be a quick discussion, or if there is a lot of prior knowledge that needs to be built, particularly if they're ESL learners, then, you know, that might take some time. It's also important in this step, I guess steps 2 and 3 here are quite linked, to build the field, and sorry, 3 and 4, to develop that prior knowledge. But then step 4, after we've developed that prior knowledge, so, you know, they know all about the Australian animals because they're going to come across them in the book, then you really need to be able to tell the story also using the vocabulary of the text. Now here I'm talking more about a book study where students would all be reading the same text. Now this step is really important as well. If you are getting students to read individual, like choice texts here, this might be something that you do more one-on-one with students. It might be something that you get them to recap to you, to reflect on what the story is to you. If I'm doing this as a book study, I actually use the book as I'm telling them the story. I don't read it to them, but I do use all that vocabulary that we might have talked about already, and I use all those concepts that I might have opened up when we've been talking about prior knowledge as well. And I use the book because as I tell the story, oh, so there was a boy and he was told that he had to steal something. Oh, that's right, he had to steal a gizmo. His friend Floggett made him do that. As I'm flicking through, I'm telling you the story about what's happening on that page. So I'm actually giving the students meaning, knowledge that they can then rely on when they go back to read. So they might get stuck on a page and be like, oh, what's that word? Miss Baker said that he went to something at the moment. Oh, stall, that's right. That word must mean stall. So even if they lose track of some text, they haven't lost track of the meaning of the story. They know what's going to happen next because I've already opened that up to them. Remember as well that guided reading isn't a test. It's us guiding them in their reading. Testing is a completely different thing altogether. This is really a time for us to assist the students in their reading. So really giving them as much as possible before reading is so important, because then during reading, we listen in to students read individually. So in my classroom, all the students are reading independently during this stage, during the reading stage. Because they don't have to actually be in groups, they can be sitting at their tables to read, they can be sitting at the floor, they can be sitting in places that are specific. Because they don't have to do a particular activity for their group, they all just need to read independently. I just need that one group that I'm working with to be on the floor with me or be around a conferencing table. And that group are the group that I'm going to be listening to that day as they're reading. So they're all reading independently as I'm listening in to individuals read. As I listen to individuals read, that might only last for a minute or two, I prompt and assist them in their reading. So I love the 3-second rule, which is that if a student gets to a word and they're going, and I felt a bit, and I'm counting to 3, 1, 2, 3, if they still don't have it, I give the student that word. So if a student ever is stuttering or concerned about a word or goes back and keeps checking a word, count to 3, give it to them. Remember that it's guided reading. We're helping them in their reading. We're not testing them. You might also prompt students, say if they're not rechecking as they're reading, you might say, oh, go back and read that part again. It didn't quite make sense to me. Did it make sense to you? No. Okay, let's go back and reread that part again. Or you might say things like, how about we just slow down a bit as you're reading? I noticed that you're reading really quickly today, and you might lose track of some meaning there. You take notes of all these things as well. You know, don't be interrupting the student every 2 minutes, but in that minute that you're listening to them read, take some notes about what you notice they're doing. Perhaps if you have had to assist them a few times, you might be noting that down as well. And I'm going to show you more detail on that in the next slide as well. And then after reading, we need to allow students to respond meaningfully to what they've read. Now, this might be around a strategy. So again, if you're doing a strategies-based group, you might be working with that group all on their vocabulary building, and their response might be that they're writing down some new vocabulary that they found, and that they might be investigating that vocabulary. But it might even just be that they respond by talking about by writing a reflection about what's happened and their feelings towards it. There's so many different ideas as well of ways that students can respond to reading, and there's some examples as well in the book. I'll talk about responding to reading a bit later on when we talk about a reading journal as well, because this can be a really great way to respond to reading if you're doing a guided reading approach. So I think I've kind of answered the questions there. If I haven't though, feel free to keep typing. I'll keep looking at it. We're going to do a little activity now, which is that I'm going to show you a text, and I want you to think about what prior knowledge might be needed if that was going to be a guided reading text, if you were going to get a group of students to read this, and what vocabulary might need explanation before students were to read it. So let's just go over here, and hopefully this link works for us. So it's this book by Graham Base. Graham Base writes beautiful books. Okay, and I'm just going to scroll down, and as I do, I want you to type in the chat, or feel free to just mentally note it if you'd like to use the mic, anything that you notice that might need explanation before students were to read this text. Yeah, so where those places are is really important. Oh, sorry, I went a bit too fast there. I'll just go back up. There we go. This is a good part as well. Any other prior knowledge or vocabulary parts? A top, yeah. Those names of the animals, what they look like, yep.
A gig.
What was that one?
What a two-wheeled gig.
Oh, you just broke up a little bit. Esther?
Two-wheel jig, I think she's saying, the
two-wheel jig.
wagon. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Carriage.
thank you. Yes, totally. What is a two-wheel gig? Like, yeah, what is that? To explain that as well. So there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot in here. A lot of colloquialisms, kind of slang. Upon her hopping steed. If you don't know that a kangaroo hops, if you don't know what a kangaroo does, then how are you going to understand that that's talking about her riding or if you don't know that a steed refers to a horse, then you're not going to know that that refers to her riding a kangaroo as if it's a horse. So there's a lot of knowledge there. Even the other thing I always think about when I look at this book, and I love this book, is the term grandma. And if we go back to that front page, you know, this is written in a time when grandmas are meant to be sitting at home and knitting and crocheting and making jams. And students that we have in our classrooms now, their grandmas are probably far from that. Grandmas are, and grandparents are generally, you know, one of the primary caregivers of a lot of kids. And a lot of them are still working or in the workforce. And a lot of them aren't even called grandma anymore. There's a lot of other names for grandma now. So think about that as well. There's some of those big themes of text that we might take for granted that for other students might be completely foreign themes. But great. Did anyone else want to share anything in the mic you noticed?
Depending on the age group, even miles as a measurement compared to kilometres, and most people are going to know what a pub is, I suppose, but it depends on the age group there too. So,
I think that's true. I think that's huge. Yeah, definitely. And, you know, you can see the learning that can come out of that as well as you're doing some of that prior knowledge. You can actually be linking that to other stuff that you're doing in class. Awesome. Good work, everyone. We're on fire. I feel like someone just...
Oh, yeah. Even the fact that it's a really small town and it's not like a big city like in Sydney, for example.
Yes, that's it as well. Yeah, for some children that have never, you know, been outside of a city, it can be a strange concept even, understand. Perfect. Okay, we're going to move on to reading conferences now. I mentioned these a little bit when I was talking about the last strategy. And this is explained on pages 26 and 27. If you want to flick there. You just need to flick over. So I think reading conferences really can fit in with a guided reading model. So say if you do want students to read independently in your guided reading and you do want to listen in to students individually, then what you'd be doing when you're listening to those students individually is basically mini reading conferences. I'm going to explain how reading conferences are described in the book. The first thing here that they recommend is that you make some kind of roster, and really this is just so that we have an opportunity to listen to each of our students read every week. I'll share with you 2 ways that I've scheduled reading conferences as well in a moment. The second step is that it's a one-on-one conference, so it's an individual conference with a student choice book. So here it's really important that there's a book that the student has picked that they're reading to you. So you can see as well how the way that a reading conference is described is really where students have chosen the books that they're reading in those guided reading groups. Now, what it also shows you, if it's a student choice book, is how that student sees themselves as a reader. So you might have a kid that brings you a book and you go, this is way too hard for you. Or you might have the complete opposite and go, no, 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 that's way too easy. Like, you need to find much more challenging text for yourself now. And that's a life skill as well, you know, showing the student where they are as a reader at that point. And then step 3 is that the student reads. Now they, again, only need to read to you for a minute or two. A reading conference, when I run them, wouldn't take longer than 2 minutes. And for upper primary and secondary, that would mean that they're reading maybe a page or two, depending on the text. And then for primary, I'm looking at maybe, you know, 3 or 4 pages. Again, you could get a whole book done if they're a very fast reader as well. But really, just to make it manageable, keep those reading conferences short. You're going to get enough information in 2 minutes to be able to continue on with them. And also it allows you to be able to work with, you know, a group of 5 kids in that reading session. As they're reading, you monitor and assess them, and you write notes about what the student is doing. You write, these are some things they're doing really well, and these are some things they're doing that they really need to work on. So almost those positives and negatives, if you want to think of them in that way. And that negative we talk about as a goal. Something for the student to work on, or their next step. And you actually then, at the end of a reading conference, after you've written this stuff down, talk to the student about it then and there. So you say, oh, today I noticed that your fluency was wonderful. You know, you were stopping at punctuation, and you were getting louder when things were getting more exciting and quieter as well. But one thing I noticed that you weren't doing was, you know, when there was speech marks, say you didn't, you know, change your voice, or I noticed that you didn't recheck maybe when you made a mistake, you didn't go back and check over it. Or did you notice that you actually said this word incorrectly and this is what that word means? And so you write down all that stuff and you talk to them about what that goal is. Yeah, so Tyson's got, thank you for sharing, Tyson. And feel free as well, if you're doing reading conferences, to share how these work in your class. Tyson's talked about that he completes 3 reading conferences in 10-minute independent reading session. They might read a bit, talk about the characters, later in life, comprehension questions. Yes, it does keep reluctant readers accountable. But there's something else that I like to do called a reading journal during this guided reading time that can also help with those accountability factors as well. So during that reading conference, you listen to the student read, you write those notes, and then you have a chat to them about their reading. I noticed you're doing this. This is your next step. And this can really fit nicely into guided reading, but it might be something that you like to sit outside of guided reading as well. Up to you. This was one way that I scheduled my reading conferences, and you can see that it's in a guided reading way. This was with a 4-5 class, and because of some of the behaviours in the class, I actually organised these groups in by strategy base, not by reading level base. I did this, yes, because I could split up some behaviours, but also because it meant that I didn't have all my reluctant or slower readers in one group, because you know well that when you try to read with each student in that group, it takes a lot longer than when you read with the group of kids that are on the level 30 or above and they're just speeding through these texts. So by actually spreading those kids out across the groups, it made it much more manageable that I could read with each kid in each group, each session that I had them. And, you know, some of the strategies they were working on were things like developing their vocabulary. And that's just as important for students who are working at lower, you know, levels of reading to those that are working much higher than what's their expected level of reading. But there is a negative to scheduling reading groups like this. You'll see I've got my Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday group. Can anyone guess what the negative or the bad part of scheduling your reading conferences or your reading groups like this might be? Missing days, public holidays, weekly changes. Yes, kids being away, you guys have got it. You know what life in the schools are like. And you know, things like, oh, David's always away on Fridays. His family like to take these long weekends, so I never get to read with David. Or how come everything is scheduled on Wednesdays, like athletics carnivals and swimming carnivals, and so suddenly I don't have Wednesdays. I mean, we don't have that problem as much anymore, but you know, there's so many interruptions in our week as it is, that if you have a very scheduled way of conferencing with your students, you're going to find that you're always missing out a few students. So what I made sure I always had with me as well is something a little bit more flexible, and that was this spreadsheet. So this is just a little snippet of the spreadsheet, where down one side I had all the students' names, and then across the top I had each week. So you can see this is week 6. I've hidden the previous weeks, and the other weeks are on this side here. And for each student, I would write a goal and an observation as I'd run a reading conference with them. So then it was obvious to me, if I did a quick scan down my list, if there were kids that I hadn't got to meet with that week, or kids that perhaps had missed 2 weeks, and they would be high on my priority list to take some time out with and to have a quick reading conference with. So this was a really good way, I found, of keeping check that I was being able to conference with all the students. It also gives you a bit of insight into some of the information to record in a reading conference. So this book talks about recording students' comprehension and their reading strategies when you're writing some conference notes. And there's some really good ideas there of kind of what to think about as you're running that conference. With the comprehension, I would just get the students to do a quick retell. If they are reading independently in that guided reading manner, before you come to them, then they've already read a part of the text that they're reading, hopefully. So when you get to sit next to them, or you pull them away from the group a little bit to listen to them read, you can say to them, what's happened so far? And you'll be able to tell very quickly if that student has been able to understand what's happened so far, because they'll be able to retell it to you. So comprehension is a big thing to record. The strategies then, and that comes from really listening to that student read, and then any of those miscues, so those errors that they make, those are the things that you'd be writing down. Oh, I noticed they said this word like this word, or I noticed that they missed this full stop. I noticed that they went back and tried this word 3 times, but then they got it right the third time. But the final thing that I'd say to record are reading practices. And here we can think of ourselves as readers, and rather than have a long list of reading strategies, think about all the strategies that you use as a reader. Think about all the things that you do when you read a difficult text, and then apply those to your students. Because you, as an accomplished reader, have a lot of strategies that your students are still developing. So if you think through those and notice the ones that your students aren't using that maybe you would use if you were reading a difficult text, then those are some that you could be writing down as well. I'll just tell you a few of the examples that I have here on some of the things that I've recorded for these students. So for Griffin, for example, my observation here, things that he was doing really well, was I noticed he was decoding really well. And that was a goal that he'd worked on from the previous week. So I'd been able to then write that in my observation, and that he noticed really interesting vocabulary. And this was another really big goal for him. So he'd been writing those down as he'd been reading on a Post-it note. Then I noticed that a goal for him was really to connect to the real world, and this would assist his meaning, applying of meaning to what he was reading. So he had a lot of trouble actually going, oh yeah, I know stuff about that, and so I can apply my meaning to this text so that I can decode some of those words a bit easier. And stopping and pausing whenever he saw punctuation, that was another thing he wasn't doing. So he was just reading through full stops. And then I would talk to Griffin about that goal and that observation, and we work on that then for the following week. That would be when I sat down with him next time. I'll remember that you need to really stop and pause with that punctuation. So let's have a practice, and now you have a read. And that's how it really feeds in. So you can see this is great formative assessment, brilliant for assessment, brilliant for report writing, brilliant for speaking to parents, but even better for the learner. They know how they're going. They're getting the feedback weekly about how they're going and what they need to be working on. If you're interested in reading conferences and want a bit more information, I'd highly recommend this book by Jennifer Severello and Gravity Goldberg. It's all about reading conferences. You can see another great example here as well of a way to structure your conference notes, and they're like putting a kid's name on each page, the date that they were reading, and they talked about compliments to give the reader and then what I could teach the reader. So again, talking about those goals and things that you're noticing. Okay. I'm sure that there is a few questions around reading conferences, and if you have them, feel free to pop them in the chat. I've got an activity for us to do now. I'm going to get you to have a little reading conference and listen to a student read. And I want you to, let's go to the next slide. I want you to tell me what you notice and what you would record about this student's strengths and perhaps some goals. So, you know, if you're someone who wants to pop it in the chat, feel free to start typing it there, and then you can just post it and what you notice and what you think a goal would be for them. But feel free to use the mic as well. I love a chatty group. It stops me from talking the whole time. So feel free to just write down some notes yourself and share afterwards. This student was in Year 4 at the time and is reading Demon Dentist by David Wallens, and the page that they're reading is just here.
As a result, the boys' teeth were almost all yellow. The ones that weren't yellow were brown. They were bored, but the strains of the goodies that the children loved, but Dennis hates. Sweets, fizzy drinks, chocolate. The teeth that were neither yellow nor brown simply weren't there anymore. They had fallen out. One had bitten into a toffee and stayed there. Assorting fruity flavoured chews had challenged. This is what young Alfred looked like when he smiled.
I just noticed the punctuation. They tended to miss the full stops, and the commas in the sweets, fizzy drinks and chocolates were like non-existent.
Yeah. Yeah, so, you know, that might be their goal then as well, that you'd say to them, oh, I really noticed that, yeah, you kind of read through that punctuation. Let's go through and highlight it, and then your next goal is that. Perfect and brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. We've got a few more things as well. Jess has said focus on punctuation to help demonstrate the understanding the meaning of the text, and careful read, like so slowing down the reading maybe. Pointing to the words as well, so actually using your finger while you notice that they were skipping some words perhaps, or adding extra words you've written there, Dawn. Did anyone else notice anything else that this reader was doing?
They were really good at sounding out the words when they didn't know it, and even with claimed, they had a go at trying to read it anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting word because she said something like chant, like she had a ch sound at the beginning, and so it almost makes me think that perhaps she can't actually differentiate between the L and the A in this type, and that it could look like a CH to her perhaps, but if she'd gone back and thought, does that make sense, or is that meaning not there? If she just thought that to herself, perhaps then she'd change that word. Did anyone notice she didn't reread any parts that she'd gotten incorrect? She almost just like bulldozed her way through, even though, you know, there were errors there. And so even saying, you know, you can even go back and reread if you've made an error. Like it's better to get that word correct than to just bulldoze your way through. Sing-song reading, yeah, rather than using punctuation, yeah. So she was almost putting in her own fluency. Started really confidently as well, though. That would be like a positive that I'd say to the student. You started super confidently, and it was almost like as soon as you saw that the text was more challenging than what you expected, that you really, rather than, you know, keeping up with that fluency and slowing down a bit, you, yeah, got a bit stuck. Great. Can you see as well how much you picked up from just listening to that student read for just over a minute? That was over a minute, and that's enough for a conference. Already you know what the student's doing well and what they need to work on. Were there any other comments there?
And I just thought, same as what people said, if she slowed down and took notice of that punctuation, but there was also some really great descriptive language and stuff in there that she could have made more of, really put some inflection and some real personality into if she slowed down.
Yes, that's it. If she'd slowed down, yeah. There was this question here. Esther asked if it's realistic to do reading conferences with kinder students. It's more than realistic to do reading conferences with kinder students. You know, when kids start to read, even as pre-readers, they're reading images and they're telling you about story. You can be looking at their reading skills very early before they're even understanding like words. So if they want to be telling you a story in a reading conference, then that can be the reading conference you do with that kinder. And you can be going, okay, so I noticed that they know which way the book's held, they know which way to turn the pages, they're trying to follow text with their finger. You can write all that stuff down, and then it can be stuff like, okay, the next thing that they need to be able to do is they need to be able to decode some of these words. With kinder as well, it's really important that you have texts that are at their level. So there are a huge number of lists of quality texts that are great for kinder students to be reading. And like one that is a personal favourite, and everyone knows it, is Where is the Green Sheep? The repetition in that book makes it super easy for younger readers to read. There's another one called Orange, Apple, Pear, Bear by Emily Gravett. It's those 4 words in different orders on each of the pages, but each of the pages there's different meaning there portrayed by the pear and the orange and the apple and the bear. So it actually takes a bit of comprehension for the student to read it as well. But there's many, many books there as well that you can be reading with kinder students. I'm really passionate as well about being able to allow students to read whenever they're ready. My son's 3 and he already loves reading text, and he'll put in words that he's heard me say when he's reading these texts. So, you know, he might not be reading the actual text, but, you know, as a nerd, I'm going, oh, look, he's moving the pages correctly. So it's never too early to start a reading conference. You'll be able to pick up something and you'll be able to go, okay, well, this is something I can learn from it. And if you want a list of books that are easier for that really, you know, beginning or pre-reading stage, send me an email. I will have my email at the end of this as well. Same for anyone as well at any year level. Dawn's mentioned that she does parent reading at her daughter's school and sometimes gets hesitant to correct because students might lose their confidence. And I know that feeling as well, and I think that's something that you do have to judge as well, Dawn. Sometimes kids just want to, you know, bulldoze through and let you know. I think when they're really hesitant around a word, that is when I do my 3-second rule. I won't correct them if they're on a roll, but that might be a discussion that you have afterwards. Like, did you know that this word was actually this word? We're now going to switch over to writing conferences, which is on page 28. So just flip over the page for writing conferences. I love writing conferences. I think this is something else that you can be doing every day in your class. And, you know, again, depending on the year level, I am mindful that secondary teachers have a lot of pressures to get through in their short times with their English classes. But a writing conference is just that. It's a discussion about how the student is becoming a writer. And that's what we want our students to all be. We all want them to be writers. So I learn a lot from the way that Hancock and Lever explained writing conferences in this chapter. What I'd seen previous were completely teacher-driven conferences where teachers might get students' work and they might highlight several errors and then go, okay, off you go fix all those. Or even worse, when teacher takes the book, goes away, marks it without the student, and then there's some feedback on the bottom, or there's no feedback and there's your work back. A writing conference is much, much more than that. It's really a discussion about the student's work, and it should focus on the craft of the student's work and their craft as a writer. It's really student initiated rather than teacher led, if that makes sense. So the steps here are that we make a roster again, or you can make it really flexible and you can allow the students to make the roster. I started with really set in stone rosters, like there's the kids I'm going to look at their writing on this day, and you're going to come for a writing conference on this day in this writing session. You're going to be first, second, third, fourth, fifth, while everyone else continues their writing. What I found with that was that I was getting kids when they weren't ready or they didn't really need the conference at that point, and then the kids that were really wanting the conference were missing out. So I had a really flexible roster system in my class, which was that I would, on the whiteboard, have a list where students could come and write their names when they wanted a conference, and I'd work my way down the list during that writing conference time. If I didn't have time to talk to all the students about their writing, then I'd start from where I was at, and then I'd pick up those kids later. During that writing conference time as well, all the other students would be working on their writing. So I used a writing cycle approach, and if you don't know what a writing cycle approach is, do have a look for it. It's kind of a Donald Graves approach as well, so look up Donald Graves writing cycle if you're more interested in it. Basically, it means that students continue on with their writing. Writing conferences don't necessarily come at an editing phase. They don't necessarily come at a drafting phase. They come whenever the student needs to talk about their writing. So for some of my students, it meant that they would actually write up their name for writing conferences multiple times as they were writing one piece, like one story or one, one piece of poetry even, or an information report, that they would write their name up for a writing conference. I had some really reluctant writers who were writing their names up every week, or some that even had, every second lesson would have their names up there. And it was literally because they wanted to have a writing conference, and I'd say to them, okay, so tell me where you're up to today. They'd say this is, and it's okay, so what do we need to work on next? They'd say, oh, well, I'm not really sure about this part. What should I do next? And I'd write down some notes or some ideas for them. We'd talk over those, and then they'd go away and do it. And these students, it was just like that little boost in confidence, because these conferences weren't going for ages and ages, and they were meeting with me quite quickly. It meant that I could talk to a lot of different kids. So for some kids, it's going to be once in a piece of writing. For others, it's going to be multiple times. But you make that work for you and your class and your students. You can also, when you're doing a writing conference, be writing down some notes for yourself as well. So during that writing conference, during that one conference, the students explain 3 things: what they're writing about, where they're up to, and how you can help. And I always prompt in this as well. So I noticed that you did this, but you didn't do this here. So you can also do some prompting there as well to understand what they know about the writing process. The simple thing of, I noticed that you put a full stop at the end of this sentence, but then this is a very, very long sentence and there's no full stops in here. Do you think there needs to be one there? So you can see how much they understand about sentence structure and punctuation there as well. But in saying that, during this step, as the student's talking through their writing or reading through their writing, if they're a younger student and it's not too long a piece, they need to read through the whole thing as well, mind you, because I know that when you get to the upper year levels, sometimes these pieces of writing go on and on and on and on. They can just give you an understanding of where they're up to and what they want to see next. With younger years, yes, you generally do need them to read through because you need to be able to decipher what they've tried to say, and you might need to write some of those words. As they're reading through or talking about their writing, I'm doing that quick proof edit. So I'm, checking spelling, perhaps putting in the correct spelling of words. I might be putting in full stops. I might be putting in any punctuation or any spelling that I don't want them to have as a goal. So think of that clearly as, it's not that I'm editing the entire piece of work. If there is one thing, one edit there that I want to give them as their takeaway or their goal, I won't do that. But I'm trying to take away as many factors that are going to not be helpful for that student to reach their next goal in writing. So the one with the student, I give them only one goal or takeaway. It can be about the plot, it can be about capitalization, it can be about sentence length, it can be about you know, their opening, there's the starter of a sentence. It can be what will happen next. It can be about building suspense. And it generally comes from that discussion that you have with the student, like, you know, oh, I'm really struggling with this part, I don't know what to do next. Oh, well, maybe you need to introduce a new character, or maybe you need to think where you've described this scene. And then write notes on this. I really focus, and I really encourage you as well to make sure that it's only one goal or takeaway from each conference, because this allows it to be doable. For any writer, it's so hard to take criticism. And when I get drafts back from my supervisors and they have so many edits on them, I go, oh, I'm a terrible writer. So for our students that are developing as writers, giving them one goal or takeaway, not only it doesn't batter their confidence, it gives them something that, okay, I can improve that with my writing. I'm going to go and do that now. And then if they need to come back for another conference, tell them, say, oh, after you do that, you know, go and work on your writing a bit more. I'd love to see you for another conference before you get to publishing this piece. Yeah, and write some notes for yourself, of course. Questions around writing conferences, ideas, people that are using them, people that have issues with them, feel free to share. We're going to have a quick activity now while we look at a student's piece of writing. I want you to imagine that this student has come to you with this writing for a writing conference. What takeaway or goal would you give them? What thing do you notice? What would you want their goal to be? If they were just up to here and they said, look, I need your help. What can I improve in my writing? What would you help that student with? Come on, guys. Do you want me to read it? I'll read it while you're thinking. How about that? One thing they could improve. Oh, yes, some great ideas are coming here. Spelling, homophones. We need to make sure that it's really specific, that it's something that the student can go away and do straight away. So when we say spelling, if it's a specific word, it might be like, I really want you to focus on, or it might be a specific spelling pattern. So be really specific with the goal so that the student goes, okay, yep, I can do that, and takes it away and does it. Like there's very little thinking work that they have to do once you give them that goal to work on. We want to make it really doable so they feel like they're achieving as well. Yes, sentence starters, it might be that. And that's one of the things that I notice as well in this writing, that the way that they've even started it's not very powerful, but yet they're trying to build this suspense. There's another one. Yep.
I was going to say specificity, like one day not too long ago, and then like she tripped over something, you know.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yes, that's so true. Being more specific about what you're talking about. And you can see that I think they've probably borrowed an opening from Possum Magic one day not too long ago. There were two friends named Charlie and Mia. You know, is one day not too long ago the most powerful way that you could start this? Well, maybe not. And then she goes on to say they did everything together, like go on adventures or find mysteries. Then one day, I think that's meant to say one day, they were playing in Charlie's backyard and Mia tripped over something and fell on the grass. So she's got then one day again, it's like, well, those sentence starters, surely we can change them up a little bit. And what that thing is that Mia's tripped over on the grass. It might be that the spelling of mysteries is something that they could really work on, because that is an interesting word to spell. So you can talk about the spelling of that word, put it in the column of that student's work and say, okay, I want you to change mysteries in your work. And then next time it comes up, you've got that word here that you're going to work on. You're going to put in correctly. Descriptive words and adjectives, yeah, to describe that setting. Paint the picture. That's exactly right, Jess. Even if you think about, okay, where would I take this story next if I was writing it? You know, and I talked to this student about, well, you're writing a mystery text, so you need to make sure that you keep a level of suspense there. And the way that we keep suspense is by not telling something to our audience. So don't tell me what Mia tripped over yet. I keep that as a mystery still. maybe explain how Mia's is feeling, explain what happened to Mia next, explain how Charlie is feeling. You could even talk about capitalization of proper nouns. I can see that you've capitalized Charlie and Mia up here, but you haven't down here. Why is that? Student might not understand that capitalization of proper nouns is an important thing and why we use it and when we use it. And you can really, pull that learning out of that student as you're having this conference with them. Great ideas, everyone. Amazing. We're going to move on now to some strategies that I think are strategies that you might not use every day, but they're really helpful strategies in promoting literacy in your classroom and can really assist your students in their literacy. So we're going to look at 2 of these. The first one is fast writes. Now, these are quite well known and sometimes called quick writes or rocket writing. They're explained really well in this book though, and I'd highly encourage you to just open up your thinking about quick writes or fast writes, how you are doing them, and maybe if there's extra parts that you could add to the way that you run your quick writes or fast writes if you're already using them. If you haven't heard of them before, wow, you're in for a treat. So these are explained on page 18. Fast writes are one of those fantastic strategies that you can whip out so easily. They can take as long as you want, and they can give you a piece of writing to workshop with a student. That previous piece of writing that you just saw that we just started talking about, that actually came from a fast write. So you can get this snapshot of students' writing style. You can have something that then they can work on, that they can edit. But most importantly, can actually make students love writing again. Because what a fast write does is it takes away all the other parts of writing that sometimes weigh our writers down, and it allows them to just enjoy the process of writing again. So, and this really comes from the rules of a fast write. So the steps here are that we firstly explain those rules. And the rules are that everyone will be writing non-stop for the time limit, and that the writing is the focus, not the spelling, not the sentence structure. It is just the writing. And when you talk about that and you say, oh, I'm taking off my spelling goggles, I'm taking off my grammar goggles, I just want you to be writers for this whole time non-stop, it actually frees up a lot of your students, especially I'm thinking of the students in upper years where perhaps, spelling is the thing that drags them down as they write, and they probably don't write as creatively as they could because they think, oh, I can't spell that word, so I'm now just going to write a simpler word there. Or I'm going to write something shorter because I can't work out how to put in those speech marks, so I'm just not going to put in any speech at all. So when you say, I'm taking all that stuff away, you just need to write, it almost frees them up for that writing. You need to give them a time limit. And often I say to students, you need to start and finish a piece of writing in this time limit. It's like an added challenge. But the time limit is also really motivating that, during this whole time you need to be writing. That's your challenge. Then you model. So you give students an example of what they might be doing for that fast write. I actually like to model while students are writing, unless it perhaps is their first time doing a fast write or they are in the junior years. Other than that, I would be writing as they're writing and showing them that during a fast write, yes, I'm writing the whole time, but I might still be going back and editing my writing. I might be stopping and thinking about my writing and adding parts in, all those processes that writers do. We don't necessarily just write. We do stop, we do think, we do go back. And then you need to give the students some kind of stimulus. Now, this will be their topic for writing. It could be that you use music as a stimulus. You could use an event that's happened in your school or in your community. It could be that you use a song or a piece of music or a movie or just an item. You could put a shoe on a table and say, this is our writing stimulus. We're going to write about this. Who wore it? Tyson there as well has shared Pobble 365. It does have amazing writing prompt pictures as well. Yeah, it's a very good site as well. The main goal is to get them to think creatively. really, with your stimulus. But again, this depends on what your goal is. I often like to use it as a creative writing time, but your stimulus could be just a question. Tell me everything you know about, I don't know, perimeter. And then your writing, your fast write is actually going to be a pre-assessment for a maths topic that you're doing. You know, it could be, tell me everything you know about the Second World War. And that could be your stimulus. And then your fast write is actually a pre-assessment in a way as well. So it depends on what your purpose is in the fast write. So it can kind of be used across subject areas in that way. But I do love to use them for narrative, and I've used them a lot for narrative, much more so than I've used them in any other way. Okay, and yeah, so images are a great one as well. I generally just search writing prompts, Google image search, and you get some beautiful ones there. And then you have some kind of warm up to writing. Now this is really important. Before you jump straight into the writing, allow the students some time to think, some time to process what they're seeing or hearing or whatever the stimulus is, and almost do that little bit of thinking and planning. They could chat to a friend about what they're thinking. You could make a thinking cloud and write different ideas in there. You might do a quick brainstorm. And then students write. And finally, you allow them to share. And I always allow this to be an opt-in thing so that students don't feel that they have to share. Sometimes I make it that everyone shares, but I'm actually going to share your writing. So that way students do have lots of errors and they're having trouble reading, then, I can put on my teacher vision and I can try to decipher what they've read as well. It's also really good as an accountability factor because then students know that there's going to be a time to share what they've got. And you'll find that students will just really want to share as well. I've seen students who completely turned off writing. They'd grown as soon as it was writing time. When you told them that it was a time for a fast write, they would just light up. They were so excited. Again, down in our junior years, you can totally use fast writes as well. You're modifying how long they're going to go for. You might give them that sentence starter that you want them to start with. In the forest might be my sentence starter. And so they've all got that to start with. And then they're going to write the rest of that sentence. A fast write can be a whole narrative. It can be a sentence. It can be however much you want it to be, really. So you can see this is an example of a fast write I did. There was our image. I don't like to talk a lot about the image. I just like to present it and say to students, what do you think it is? I don't like to give a lot away, just to open up that creativity. And I like to use the classroom timers. This is an online one that you can use on a smartboard. That real visual timer I think is really important as well, so students can actually see the time going. If you don't have a smartboard, even just writing it up on your whiteboard and crossing off the time as it goes, putting up a stand time, anything like that, just to give the students that visual of how much time's left so that it can be a silent writing time. This was our thinking, our warm-up. So we did a bit of a brainstorm and questioning what the image was. So is it a gorilla? Is it a swamp monster, a grass giant? And you can see by this brainstorm, it's actually feeding into all the students' ideas, and it's also giving them vocabulary that they can use and work with as they go and start their writing. And for this writing time, I allowed the students the option of using their Chromebooks, and students could choose to write in pencil and paper, but another factor here that I was trying to get through to the students was that computers can also just be for writing, that sometimes we need to just sit and we need to just start our work at our computers. We don't need to change fonts or add in images or change your mouse to a different strange picture. You can just sit there and write. And so it was really about that focused work on the Chromebooks and writing. And it also meant that the students could share their writing with me through Google, and then I could share that to all the students. So they shared it to me through the classroom, and then we shared it all up on the smartboard for everyone to see at the end of the lesson. So it's kind of a nice way for everyone to see each other's writing. Okay, and now it's your turn. So put down your cup of coffee, pick up your pencil. I hope you all have one. Or make sure that you're sitting ergonomically in front of your keyboard and start typing in the chat. I'm going to give you a minute. You don't have to finish your piece of writing doing this. I'm not going to model, but I'm also going to be writing while you're writing. Our stimulus is this image here that you can see. And I think that's about it. Are you ready to write? I hope you are. Yes, you are. Okay, we're all going to be writing. Are you ready? Off we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You've got a minute, go. I'm finishing in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Post. Where's my enter button? Where's everyone else's writing? Come on, guys. Would anyone like to use the microphone to share their writing?
I don't mind. I will again.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Where's everyone else's writing? Come on, guys. Start writing now. You've got a minute. I'm looking at you. Go for it.
All right. Just look at this picture. This pretty much sums up the day I've had. Let me go back though, right back to the start. It all began when I woke up in a different bed. Actually, it wasn't even a bed.
Awesome. Awesome. Well done. I'm waiting for your writing, people. Intimidated by the audience. Was super intimidating, definitely. No. Wow. Wow. That is the quietest people have been on writing. Well, I hope that you did at least try. I think it's a really important thing for us to be able to do as educators as well, to just feel free to write sometimes and to just, yeah, Holly, you're a star. And he ran and ran as the waves came crashing behind him. His first thought was to save his owner, but he didn't want that to hinder his own safety. Jess, that's perfect. You could just write that. That is fine. These, you know, the writing prompts and images that you get, they are a bit weird in images, and yeah, they can be a bit engaging then for the creative process. All right, I'm going to move on now to visual text and the critical analysis of these. This is something that's super close to my heart. I'm focusing on critical analysis of multimodal text in my research. So this is something that I think students need not only for schooling, and yes, it is in the Australian curriculum and throughout it, but actually it's a life skill now. We know that students, just as we are bombarded with images on tablets and TV, on books, on games, on any device, on any wall, in any classroom, there are images. You know, you walk through the shopping centre and there are so many different images, and each of these have messages and each of these have underlying hidden messages. What's important for our students is not only to be comprehending them and going, okay, that's a picture of this and that, but actually to be able to critically analyse them and be able to say, okay, they're trying to sell me this thing through that image, or they're trying to provide me with that view of the world and that's actually incorrect. It's not a true view. So I think that this is a life skill, not just a school skill, and it's something that therefore we should be teaching students to do, you know, from kinder all the way up throughout their schooling career. So I recommend reading The Shape of Text to Come by John Callow. He writes a lot about visual text, multimodal text, and being able to critically analyse these with students. But some basic steps are also given in this book. The steps here are that you firstly need to choose a topical text. Now, the authors mentioned just examining books that you've read in class and looking at the images and text in the books, but you can start to think of movie adaptations of maybe the books that you're reading. Another great place to start is to use something super relevant, which students might have an opinion in. It can be that students are represented in that image. Perhaps it's back to school ads and how students are represented in those. Perhaps it's toy commercials and how girls and boys are represented differently and with different toys. But something that those kids might have an opinion in because it might be representing them can be really powerful. But you can think even broader. You think about how Australians are represented. What are some images when we look up Australia now in Google? And there's a lot of interesting ones there that you can start to talk about. You know, how does this represent Australia? Is this realistic to life in Australia currently? Is it just showing, you know, these situations or those situations? Yeah, and I think that that's a really powerful thing to do with the students as well. Particularly because, you know, Australia, when it's represented, it's not like we've got a huge country. There's a lot of different things going on in it. And so showing an image to personify Australia is very difficult. The second step is that we allow students just to view that text, to look at those pictures, to just enjoy it. And you might explain any parts they might miss. So you really slow down this part. I've used Pixar short films a few times to do this kind of critical analysis, particularly in lower grades, but they would work for any grade. But there is one short film there that is based in an American schoolyard during their recess break. And American schoolyards look really different to those that we have in Australia. And so it was important for me to explain that, you know, it's fenced in, it's concrete, there aren't a lot of toys there, there's not a lot of equipment there. So to explain those things before the students watch that one. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm thinking about topical, Matt. I think even if you thought about some of the images that we've seen in the news recently, you know, what's the meaning behind here? What's the purpose of this image? Why are the media choosing this image? All that kind of stuff. And there's meaning behind it. Really topical to do right now, I think, especially with kids and what's happening in the world. But always. Then we explore some questions around that image, and these are listed in the book. If you haven't turned to page 73 and 74 yet, do that now, because you're going to want to look at these questions as I flick through them and as we do a little activity around critical visual text analysis. So we need to think about things like the intended audience of the text, and we discussed this. So who is it meant for? Who did they make this image for? Where is it being displayed, and what gives us those hints about who it's for? The producers and the purpose. So who made it and what was their purpose? Why did they put it together? Did they have anything to gain by making this? The reality and the realism of it. And this is really good when you show a text that actually gives them what they already have some prior knowledge around, because they'll be able to tell you if that text is real or not. You know, if it's of you know, a coastal town and people relaxing on the beach, now that you live in this coastal town, and then, you know, the people that live there go, oh, actually, we don't do that. That's not real. That's not how our life looks. So the reality and realism of text is a really interesting thing to analyse, because then it also speaks into what the purpose of the text was. We also think about what's missing or who is missing. You know, is there that, thinking that toy catalogue, and you've got your boys and your girls looking at the toys, well, where are the parents? Are they pictured in the toy catalogue? Are the grandparents there? Because generally they're the ones buying all the toys. And why? Why has it been that the kids have been pictured with the toys and not the adults? What's that message that's being sent to us through that? And finally, looking at the stereotypes. Are there really obvious stereotypes in this image, or is this image almost trying to break those stereotypes by changing it up and having a think and talk about that? Once we've probed the text with these questions, we really make this a part of our routine. I mean, you record this as well, these questions and these answers. The kids might record them individually. You might do it as a whole class first and then individually, however it fits your students. And then you make it a part of your routine. So you really need to make this habit. You want it to be then when you go to read something, you know, a news article, or you're looking at a new topic, you want it to be that the kids notice the images then and can straight away start doing critical analysis of these texts. So make it really part of your routine. And then finally, you allow students to redesign those texts. Don't let this be the end of it. So you've looked at that, you know, that image of Australia, and you say to them, well, how do you think Australia should be projected in the media? What do you think would be an image that would project or true image of Australia? So allow them to redesign the text, or you can make them like remake the text with the same modelling as that original text. So you can think about, yeah, those health brochures and how they're made, and they're made with, you know, really clinical images and images of, you know, people looking clean and nice and polite and all those kinds of things. So that might be how then they remodel that text based on the same scenario.
I was just going to say that when I was on my practical, I taught year 6 and we played a game called Fact or Fiction, which worked out really well. So they had to give reasons for a text being true or false, and it was just based on images, usually in advertisements. Yeah. And we had to say why it would be true and why it would be false, and then you could show them how Photoshop would work and how it can be like tweaked. It doesn't have, even if it's a photo, it doesn't have to be real life.
Yes. And I think as well, you know, if you're we're all teaching persuasive text in some form or another, an image is such a huge part of persuasive text now, that it is really important that we do look at it from this critical viewpoint. So I've got a little activity for you, and that is that I want you to have a look at these images with me that are on the Teach for Australia website. And we're going to probe them using those questions. So, you know, if you've got some questions or comments around the discussion of who the intended audience is, what the producers and the purpose is of this, these images, the reality or the realism of these images, who might be missing, and what stereotypes, feel free to share them using the mic or pop them in the chat as well. If you don't know what Teach for Australia is, it's recruiting people who have already been working as professionals in other areas to do a short kind of postgraduate degree so that they can become teachers. It's a very, very short degree, and then they're put into classrooms around Australia. So you've got a bit of background. What do you think of this image? The first one that we're approached with when we go onto the Teach for Australia website. Who do you think the intended audience is? What gives you that impression? What are the people trying to gain from these images? What about if you think about this image and you're looking at it and you're thinking, is this like your own life? Is this realistic? I'm assuming then it's an image of a teacher. Is that what you look like? Come on, can't tell me you look like that. Okay, if you do, awesome. That's awesome. Yes, that's it. So very unrealistic. We can, Jess has hit it on the head there. There's this very formulated image here, isn't there? The teacher's looking straight at us as well, like she's trying to really engage us in this conversation that's on the site. She's clean and neat, like she doesn't have texture marks on her hands or stamps, or, you know, there's oh, hand on a hip, Dawn, yeah, showing this kind of confident teacher, and she's smiling and she's happy and she's successful, and look, her kids are improving, they're getting B pluses because she's such a good teacher. Yeah, that's it, Dawn. Stuff like how her body is even structured. Can you see a big stereotype here as well, that it's a female teacher? You know, and with a profession that is female dominated, you kind of hope that there would be more males pictured. Like, who is missing here? Oh, and Caucasian, exactly, as well. So they're not trying to break any kind of stereotype with this image, are they? They're really trying to conform to a stereotype, I feel. But you might disagree with me, and that's cool too. Yeah, so I see this as really not realistic, is it? And why? They're trying to attract a specific market. Yeah, you think just I wonder as well if by doing that, like they're trying to gain, yeah, this specific market, but we can use our knowledge about, like, does this look like real life? Do you have a lovely stack of dictionaries on your desk at this specific moment? Well, no, because the dictionaries are the one thing that are impossible to find in any school. And if anyone has that many dictionaries in their classroom, I'm coming to your classroom and I'm taking 3 of your dictionaries because my classroom needs more. So we can look at the realism here as well very easily, because we have that prior knowledge about what a teacher looks like, what a classroom looks like. Yeah, and we can start looking at the colours as well, and that's a huge thing in persuasion. When you start to look at the colours even of this website, and you can see that there are these blues that are meant to be calming colours, and also professional colours. Blue is also seen as quite a professional colour. You can look up colours and meanings quite easily. There's quite a few great graphics that explain those things. Let's have a look at this image here and critically analyze it. Feel free to use the mic as well. Again, what are you thinking when you first look at this image? What are your first reactions? All the students are engaged. It's a private school, is my first reaction. I don't think all the Teach for Australia graduates get to go to private schools. We'll just burst that bubble. Let's count her class, shall we? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 students. This woman is teaching 6 students. Realistic? I'd say not completely. And they're all super interested in whatever that is. Oh no, I know what she's showing. She's showing something about rotation, maybe. All the students are smiling. They're all happy. No one's trying to poke each other with a pencil. So there's a collaborative learning environment. Yeah, so maybe it's trying to show, you know, as a teacher, we collaborate with our students, and they're all kind of on a similar-ish level, aren't they? She is looking lovingly at the results, Jessica. She loves it, even though I don't know what it is. You can tell I'm not a secondary science teacher. Look, and when we analyse these images, I'd say, look, Teach for Australia, if you want me to show you a realistic image of a teacher, that is not it. Like, if you want me to present that to the class, to your applicants, that's not what it would look like. But look, pre-service teachers, all I need to tell you is that you can tell my hair doesn't look like that at the end of a day. And it's a messy job, it's an engaging job, it's a job that you know, means that you have to work with people, and small people are people themselves, and they have things happen in their lives as well. So they're not all going to sit around and stare at your beautiful objects that you bring in. But hey, that's maybe not what Teach for Australia's purpose is, and we can see a lot about their purpose just in these 2 images that we have looked at. So critical analysis of images is a lot of fun. It can lead to a lot of discussion in your class, and it can lead to the students really starting to analyse all the images they find in their lives. I think one image that I think is a great one to start with for critical analysis, and especially I'm thinking of the middle school teachers that are with us at the moment, and those that are in the upper primary year levels, are memes. Meme images are just, you know, they're everywhere now. So let's critically analyse and let's decide, well, why? What's the intended audience? Is it really stereotypical? Yeah, generally it is. Usually the faces are like bigger than life. You know, there's usually a whole lot of groups that are missing when we look at, you know, some memes. And I wouldn't say that they are very realistic. I mean, that's not what I look like when the laminator's broken, surely. So yeah, think about all those visual images that you see, and think about some of that critical analysis you can do. And you could start just with some picture books that you've got in your classroom, but yeah, take it further than that. There's so many images everywhere nowadays. So finally, we're going to look at some organisational tools. I haven't left a lot of time for this. I really want to touch on one of the tools though, and that is a reading journal. So reading response journals have been around as a practice for a very long time. However, how you might use this, you know, has changed. These are a way for students to respond to their reading though in class. So I think they're a really important skill to touch on, and I talked about that when we were talking about guided reading. Students need to be able to respond to their reading, respond to what they're doing, and a guided reading journal is perfect for this. You firstly need to model to students how you want them to respond. Do you want them to be writing notes as they're reading? A new way of responding is by using post-it notes and sticking these in the pages of their book. This kind of reading response was explained by Debbie Miller in her book, Reading with Meaning. If you want to know more about guided reading and reading response journals, do have a look at this book. I find though that post-it notes often get lost around the classroom, so I actually make students stick these in to their reading response journals if they do use them. As students are reading, they might be writing their notes, but I also like to make sure that they have some time to write, some allocated time to write. So it might be that you stop students, you know, halfway through a reading session or right before you want to finish up a reading session or a guided reading session, and say 5 minutes to write your response to what you've read today. And then you allow students to share those responses. And this is where we see that accountability, that students are responding to their reading. So just during that guided reading, they all are reading because they're all writing those responses. It's very clear when students are going off topic during that guided reading time if you don't see those responses in their journals. And then the fifth step here is that you respond to student entries. Now this response will encourage the students to continue their reading responses, and you don't need to respond to every entry. Make it doable for yourself. And so what I do is the group that I'm working with in guided reading, I would keep their guided reading response journals, and those would be the ones that I would be responding to. Those would be the ones that I'd be making notes and comments on each week. And then the students would see those notes and comments, so they then would get motivated again that, oh, the teacher does see what I do. They do, like, they're noticing the skills that I'm using. Another way of assessment as well. So you can see how the students are responding, the inferences they're making. You can make these responses really specific as well. So they could have a specific goal. This student is asking questions to the text as they're responding. The student's just talking about what was in their head as they were reading. But you could make it about the connections they're building, predictions around the text, anything like that. So I was going to talk about class meetings really briefly. but I've taught too much. So I would encourage you to go and have a look at class meetings on page 13. A brilliant strategy if you're looking at how to develop a democratic classroom and make decisions as a whole class that will affect your class community. I've used them in really small groups and really big groups, and I love them. I love class meetings. K to 6, great for oral language, great for developing a democratic classroom. And I want to finish up with this. You don't need to share it openly if you don't want to, but I spoke about when we were talking about a writing conference that it's important to only give students one goal or one takeaway. And then here I am talking, giving lots of ideas and lots of takeaways. I think that it's really important at this point, especially at this point in the year, that you choose one thing, one goal, one takeaway. And so I've asked that question here as we round up this evening. What is your one takeaway? You know, is it doing those quick writes? Is it those reading journals? Is it the writing conferences? Is it doing a read aloud and really making it pop? You know, is it that you want to look at the way you're doing guided reading or the way that you're structuring your reading groups? All those things. Think about what you've, or even the critical analysis of the visual text, that's something that you want to try out. Think about what your one takeaway is. Feel free to share it if you'd like to. And now, if you have any questions before we finish up the evening, you're welcome to ask them. Thanks, Jess. And the thing is to remember all the stuff that you are learning at uni. That's the hardest part, and retain that for when you're in the classroom reading conferences. Yeah, weekly for each student. And you can make them as short as you need to, Holly, as well. Yes, when they feel they need it, that's it. Thank you so much for a lovely session. Thanks for being, you were quite chatty at the beginning of the session, which is great for recordings. So this has been recorded. If you need it or anything like that, send us an email. My email's there. There is a little survey as well that I'm sure you'll get sent the link to if you're interested in giving me some feedback. But thank you so much for being a great group. I'm going to, do you get a certificate of attendance for the PD? So just if you need that, I'd email back to Robin, who got your registration for this professional learning from, where she sent you the link for this Zoom conference, and she will be able to send you what you need. Okay. It's not automatically sent out to everyone, so if you do need one, make sure that you send an email back to Robin. Thank you all for coming this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are. I hope that you all have a lovely, relaxing evening and that it is filled with enjoyable times during this crazy, crazy time. And have a wine or a gin and tonic. Alrighty. See you all. Yeah, the augmented stuff is great, Matt. And thank you for all your contributions this evening.
Thank you.
See ya.
See you later.